UDIMA, Universidad a Distancia de Madrid, la universidad cercana.
Hola, bienvenidos. Bienvenidos a este curso de verano. Yo soy Lindsay Buckingham y soy profesora del Máster en Formación del Profesorado en Educación de Secundaria y también en los grados en Magisterio de Educación Primaria e Infantil. Hoy voy a hablar de una serie de propuestas prácticas para emplear a los auxiliares de conversación. Pero primero le voy a dar paso a mi compañera Alejandra, que os va a explicar un par de cositas prácticas.
Hola, muy buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a este curso de verano que impartimos desde la UDIMA, la Universidad a Distancia de Madrid. Simplemente quería recordaros que existe un módulo de preguntas que está habilitado a la derecha de la pantalla para que durante la conferencia podáis ir planteándonos cualquier consulta o duda que resolveremos al final de la intervención de Lindsay. Así que, bueno, os animo a que participéis y a que nos planteéis cualquier cuestión que yo luego le trasladaré a ella. Gracias.
Gracias, Alejandra. So, good morning. This presentation will be done in English. Alejandra, is there something that we need to do first? Sí, vale. Vale. This presentation will be done in English. And first, I'm going to talk to you about my research that I've done on the role of language assistants. The interest for my research came because I was a language assistant in one of the first years of the bilingual program here in Madrid. And so seeing my experience and the experience of my colleagues, I really wanted to carry out some research that would be practical and that would hopefully help the language assistants and the teachers that work with them. And so the research that I did was carried out between the years of 2013 and 2015, and it was based in the community of Madrid. Okay, and I focused on bilingual schools, all bilingual schools, whether public, private, or semi-private concertado, in the three major programs of bilingualism here in Madrid, which are, of course, the Comunidad de Madrid program, the Beta program, and UCETAM. And I also focused the research on the infant and primary levels, okay? And so here, what I'm going to do today is share a few of the conclusions and the results of my research. The purpose was really to understand what the language assistants were expecting at the beginning of the year, also what teachers were expecting from them, and also to see what the experiences are of the language assistants and their teachers throughout the year. So what I did was I passed out a questionnaire at the beginning of the year to collect a series of expectations. What do they think that they're going to do? What have they heard from the training, from the initial training, from all the information they received, and also to teachers. So based on their previous experience and also from the training that they've received, what do they expect to happen throughout the year? Then in a second questionnaire, I sent the second questionnaire in January, February throughout in the school year. And so I wanted to know now, what are they actually doing in the classroom? Is it what they expected? How are they helping out? What are their main roles and so forth? And so that was part of it. Then the second phase of research, I held some focus groups in which I had focus groups with just language assistants and some focus groups with just teachers. And we discussed some of the results from the first phase of research so that we could, taking into account the difficulties that they've faced during the year and that they reported, we could try and create some solutions to those difficulties. And so that was really the second part of the research, was trying to find where training might have been lacking or whether it wasn't appropriate, or see whether the training programs were sufficient, and also try and find other solutions as well to the problems that they're facing. Okay, and so as I said, today this presentation is really going to show you some of the results of this research. And so the first thing, I want to just define language assistants. And this is, again, according to the research that I've done, okay? The typical language assistant, who are they? The typical language assistant is a university graduate. Almost all of them are already university graduates. Most of them actually in the Community of Madrid are American. 3/4 of the assistants that responded to my research were American. About 10 to 15% were British, and then a few from different countries such as Australia, South Africa, and in different places like that, in Puerto Rico. In general, they're between 22 and 28 years old. I think the average was about 25. And regarding teaching experience, generally, they have about 2 to 4 years of informal teaching experience. What does this mean? Well, maybe they've been tutors, or they've been working at a summer camp, something like that, a camp counselor. But most of them had little or no formal teaching experience. Some of them do, but the great majority of them don't. Okay, and then about half and half, some had been language assistants previously, and about half of them already had about 1 year of experience. Okay, so that's a picture of our typical language assistant. And what is their role? Again, I asked the teachers and the language assistants both, what do you expect at the beginning of the year? What do you expect the role of the language assistant to be according to your previous experience, according to your training and what you've read in the manuals? And halfway through the year, okay, what are they actually doing? What does your experience tell you? Okay, and so these are basically the results. First, language support. That was the main role that everyone reported as being the most important. I think 3/4 of both teachers and language assistants named language support as the #1 part of their role. So things like helping the students, helping the teachers as well with their pronunciation, their fluency, providing a native model of the language, and so forth. Second, teaching and classroom assistance. Now this is different depending on the perspective. From the perspective of a language assistant, many of them did say teaching. So teaching activities, leading the classroom, leading activities, things like that. But the teachers didn't use that sort of, that vocabulary to describe their role. Instead, they talked about assistance. So they assist the students or assist the teacher. They help out with the activities and things like that. So that's another big part of their role. External exams, as you see here, external exams are another part of the role, but it didn't come out so much in the expectations. Neither teachers nor assistants expected to be helping out with external exams at the beginning of the year, but halfway through the year, many of them reported actually helping with the external exams, helping prepare students for those exams. So of course, it's something that's usually done in the second half of the year, maybe after Easter week. And so maybe it's not considered at the beginning of the year, but certainly throughout the year, it's something that they start to do. Also culture. Culture was not mentioned as much as you might think, just because in the handbooks mostly, they refer to them as cultural ambassadors, ambassadors from their country and so forth. But the actual teachers and the language assistants didn't mention culture as much. Maybe, I think it was 20% or 25% of them mentioned the use of culture and the intercultural understanding and this element in the role of the language assistants. Also planning. Planning was about the same, maybe 15, 20% of the assistants and the teachers talked about their role of planning, helping teachers plan the classroom activities and so forth. Okay, so you get an idea of generally what the teachers and assistants expected to do and then what they actually did throughout the year. And then common difficulties. Unfortunately, many language assistants did report a lot of difficulties. Teachers didn't report as many difficulties. There were few teachers that reported very many, but the assistants did report quite a few. In fact, about half of the assistants that filled out the questionnaire felt they had been misused throughout the year. And what does that mean, misused? Well, they could be perhaps doing something that's outside of their role description. Maybe they've been asked to substitute the teacher They've been asked to take over the classroom completely. They hadn't felt comfortable out maybe when they were doing so. And so they felt they'd been misused because they'd been asked to do something outside of their job description. In general, there was a lack of communication reported, and this is from both teachers and language assistants. They reported a lack of communication between assistants and teachers, and also between teachers in the same school, and also between the level of the school and teachers and the administration. They reported a general lack of communication. And many of the teachers and assistants who actually reported the difficulties said that the lack of communication was the main reason that they had the difficulties. And so this is really an important point here. And we'll talk a little bit later about how we can improve the communication at all levels between the different figures and between the different levels of the programs. Also, mismatched expectations. The assistants and the teachers had different expectations regarding the role of the assistant. And so, of course, if the assistant and teachers don't expect them to do the same thing, and there's also a lack of communication, this can be a recipe for disaster. So this is also something to really work on, maybe perhaps in training or the documentation that's available. We need to work on improving this communication at this level as well before the program starts, before the school year starts, so that the assistants and the teachers know what to expect. Okay. Also, a lack of preparation in different ways. The lack of preparation was really mainly concerning the assistants. Teachers felt that the assistants weren't prepared enough, partly maybe because they aren't teachers. They aren't prepared as teachers, and so they don't have the proper training in that sense. But they also felt that the training that came from the program was often lacking. So even though they weren't prepared or educated as teachers, they also felt that they didn't have the proper preparation when they got here to Spain. Okay, and so that's the two different ways that there was a lack there. Also, the cultural differences, and this really came out in the focus groups that often there are cultural differences that maybe some people will expect, but sometimes they don't always expect that. So the assistants themselves often have a lot of culture shock. They don't know what to expect when they get to Spain, and and there's certain things maybe when they walk into the teacher's room, they expect the teachers to come over and say hello, but here in Spain, it's a little bit different. Usually the people who come in that are new are the ones that walk around and say hello. So those sort of subtle differences can really make a difference in the experience that the language assistant has in the school. And so those type of differences also in classroom management, there's a large difference in the way that classrooms and schools are managed, generally in English-speaking countries as opposed to Spain. So often language assistants come and are surprised by perhaps the level of noise, or they're not sure how to calm down the classroom, calm the children, and so forth. So that can be difficult for them as well. And also just communication. Maybe the way people communicate is different around the world, of course. And so the teachers and the assistants both have difficulties in that sense. Finally, the lack of implication of the assistant. Many teachers also complained that their language assistant didn't feel or didn't demonstrate much initiative. And so they didn't feel that they were implicated enough in the classroom and in the activities, and they complained that they would like to have an assistant who was more motivated, more interested in taking part in the classroom. Okay. So how can we change this situation? Given the fact that language assistants are, in my opinion, an excellent resource. We looked at the role. There are so many different things that they can do regarding language, regarding culture, pronunciation, giving them a reason to communicate, motivating the students. There's so many things that they can do, but there are so many difficulties that come out of this program as well, as we just saw. So how can we change the situation? How can we make it better and make it and really make the most of our assistants that we have? Well, here we have 10 tips for teachers with language assistants. And my objective today is just to give you 10 very simple, practical tips for things that teachers can do when they have a language assistant in the classroom that will hopefully ease communication, give them something to do, make them feel comfortable, and so on. Okay? And these tips really come from the results of my research, but it also comes from my experience as a language assistant, because I think until you're there, you don't necessarily know what it's like. And so I think hopefully I'll be able to share both perspectives for you and give you some interesting practical things that you can do with your assistants. So the very first thing you want to do is get to know your assistant. As I said, many of the assistants come with extremely diverse backgrounds. They might be education majors, they might have studied education in their country, but they might have studied biology or geology or anything, environmental sciences. They could have studied anything. And so ask them what they study and think about how you can use that in your own classroom. Are you an English teacher? Are you a science teacher that you teach science and English? Maybe if you teach in secondary, do you have something like biology or geology that you're teaching in English? Think about how you can use their studies and their previous experiences to your advantage. Okay, if your language assistant was a drama major, if she enjoys doing theater productions and plays and things like that, use that. Okay, think about how you can incorporate her studies or his studies into your day-to-day in the classroom. The same thing with interests. If the language assistant is a big sports fan, that's perfect. Most young people are too. So use that in your classes as well. Ask them to, if they're an American who enjoys sports, ask them to tell you about baseball. Explain the rules and how the game of baseball works, for example. That's something cultural, and that's something that students can probably relate to and may be interested in. And you can even take that to the classroom in the sense that you can play a game that's similar to baseball in your classroom with the contents of your class. Why not? Okay. And ask the assistant about their strengths. Ask them about what they want to do in the classroom. Okay. Many assistants come with an idea of what they want to do in the classroom. Some probably don't because they're not sure what to expect. But ask them and try to pull out little by little, what do you think you can do in the classroom? What are your interests? How do you think you can help our students? Did you bring anything interesting to share with them? What sort of activities do you do at home? What do you do on the weekends? Ask them lots and lots of questions. Sit down with them, have coffee, have lunch with them, and so forth, and try and get as much information as you can to start thinking about, okay, how can I use this in my classroom with my students? Also prepare your students. That's really important. The students themselves also have expectations. And so they might have had an assistant previously, or they might not have, but I'm sure that they have an idea of what to expect. And they might have a lot of stereotypes in their minds of what to expect as well. So speak to your students, tell them about the assistant that you've met or you've spoken to through email. Tell them a little bit. Say, well, his name is John, he's from Pennsylvania, he enjoys baseball. Tell them little things to get their imaginations going and start motivating them just by knowing that this assistant is coming to talk to them and to help them. Discuss the situation. Discuss perhaps the stereotypes that they might have about people from the United States or from Britain. Discuss the stereotypes, what they can expect, the way they dress, the way they act, the way they talk, different things like that. Also discuss what the students think, and this especially works better at the higher levels, at secondary level, of course. Ask them, how do you think John can help you with your English? What are you going to ask John when he comes? how do you think he can help, or what do you think he'll do with you? Just get them thinking about it, and so that they're conscious of the fact that this person's coming to help them learn, and they also think about their own learning process, and maybe even grow a little bit their autonomy in that sense as well. And so get them thinking about what to ask, how to talk to them, and so forth. And finally, ask them to show respect. This is really important, and a lot of assistants complain that the students don't necessarily show them enough respect. They don't consider them a teacher, because of course the assistants are much younger than most of the teachers. If they're only 22 years old, there's really not a lot of difference between the age of the students and the age of the assistant. So we really need to demonstrate respect toward the assistants, and also make sure that the students understand that the assistant is a teacher, that he has authority, okay? And of course, we're not going to expect the assistant to carry out discipline, but the assistant should be able to tell the teacher and carry out certain measures if necessary. But mainly, in the eyes of the students, we need to make sure that they understand that we need to respect the assistant. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to carry on a class and an activity in the classroom. Next, be clear and specific about your needs. Often, and this is, I think, a cultural difference, generally, and I hate to generalize, but I am, generally in English-speaking countries, we enjoy having very specific and direct instructions when we go to the workplace. And so try and give this to your language assistant. The assistant is going to depend on the teacher to tell them what to do, how to act, how to carry things out, exactly what to do in the classroom. And so be specific when you ask them for something. Okay, if you ask them to bring a presentation, to prepare a presentation for your students, be very specific about exactly what are they going to talk about. Okay, should we talk about, about your country? Okay, but what? The history? Do you want the geography? Do you want something more personal like my family, my house, my school, things like that? Be very, very specific about the content and also the level of English. Okay, many of the assistants don't know what to expect when they come to Spain about the level of English of the students, because maybe they haven't worked with students. They probably haven't worked with students from other countries who don't speak English as their first language. And so you need to be very specific about the speed at which they talk, to speak very clearly, to speak directly, and to keep things a little more simple than they might normally. Okay, and finally, just this also goes with guidance. It's always important to, when you see the assistant doing something, guide them a little bit, because often the assistants don't have teaching experience. So you'll need to guide them a little bit, show them how to do something, model the activity or the feedback that you want to give them. Because of course, every teacher has his or her own style. The assistant is trying very hard to adapt to that style, because the assistant also often goes to different classrooms, works with different teachers, and so has to adapt their style to the style of each teacher. And so try and remember that. The assistant will most likely appreciate that you're being frank and will do his best to comply. Also, be creative in communication. This goes back to the lack of communication in general. And since there is very, very little time to plan in the general, in schools, and we know this very well as teachers, we have very little time to plan, very little time to meet with other teachers and with the assistants. And so this is why it doesn't usually happen. So why not try and be creative? Okay, be creative with your communication. So for example, nowadays, everyone has a phone with chat, sort of chatting applications such as WhatsApp and things like that. Use that, okay? Even if it's as basic as the night before or a couple days before the assistant is to attend your class, just give them a quick message. Hey, on Wednesday, we're going to talk about a certain thing, and this is what I'd like you to do. Or, hey, next week we're talking about animals. Can you think of a song or a game that we could play about animals? Things like that. Just very simple messages, and that's the most direct way to plan and communicate without actually physically having to be in the same place. Another way to do this, one of the schools I visited through my research was actually using Google Drive to create documents with the language assistance schedule. So in Gredo San Diego Moratalaz, it was great. They were using Google Drive, and they had a spreadsheet in which they had Tom's schedule. And so they said, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, here he's with this teacher, and here he's with this teacher, and so on. And each teacher would go into that document in that spreadsheet, type in what a very, very basic programación, just the main topics for each day and for each week. And so that Tom could go in, see his schedule, and see exactly what's going to happen in each class. And Tom could even type in a suggestion for his intervention in that classroom, which is great. That's a collaborative way to work together. All of the teachers are seeing what the other teachers are doing, so it's a great way for the teachers to collaborate as well. And Tom knows exactly what to expect in each classroom, and he has a way to communicate his interests and his ideas to each of the teachers. So that's the perfect way to plan and coordinate without actually physically having to meet. Okay, technology is limitless anymore, so absolutely use it for communication and planning purposes. Also be open to suggestions. The assistant often comes with a lot of ideas. They often come very motivated and very interested and excited about participating in the classroom. And so ask them for suggestions for the classroom. Again, making sure that they know exactly what's going to happen throughout the year, and they have the topics that you're going to see, the units and so forth. Ask them for activities or songs or games. Perhaps things that they've done as a child that they remember, games that they used to play or songs that they used to sing, some simple things, activities that they used to do in school. Ask them for suggestions and try to use them. If at all possible, try to use the suggestions that they give you. Of course, many will have to be adapted in some way to make them a little more simple for the students and for their level of English. But if you can make it work, if you can use their suggestions, the assistant will be very flattered. And I think that the students will also appreciate this change of pace. I think that they'll really enjoy something different, a different person doing the activities with them. And ways for participation as well. Make sure that the assistant can give suggestions about ways to participate in the class. It might not be sort of a traditional teacher and assistant by his side that's helping him with the classroom. There are many different formats that could work, and we'll talk about a couple right now, actually. So, for example, you want to give the assistant a space to own. And this could be a physical space or a virtual space or just a space in time, okay? What the objective here is to allow the assistant to have ownership over a small part of your class, just a very small part. So, for example, if the assistant doesn't have much experience, maybe he's unsure, maybe he's, doesn't feel comfortable leading an activity or carrying the classroom, then think about maybe the assembly or any type of routine that you do at every class. Once he sees the teacher do this assembly 6, 7, 8 times, it's always the same, isn't it? It's always the same routine, and the date and the weather and all of those sort of things. Let the assistant do it. Okay, so he can take them through what day is it today and what's the weather like and so forth. So let him do it, and also let him be creative with it. So if he wants to add a different question, how do you feel today? Then you can add that into your daily assembly if you like. Okay, so really give them something that they can own and be creative with and make their own, so that they have their space every day or every week or so forth. If the assistant's a little more experienced or a little more motivated or ambitious, let them have a weekly activity. They could have maybe just 20 minutes a week to have a conversation class or an oral activity. Maybe they can have the whole class discussing a specific topic, or they can do maybe a spelling bee once a week or once a month or something like that. But think about and brainstorm these ideas with your assistant. Think about how you can incorporate them and really give them a space to own. Again, the space could be physical. So, for example, they might have a corner of the classroom that they could decorate with things from their home country, or a bulletin board as well. If you have a bulletin board in the hallway at the school, you could give them a space to decorate their bulletin board, and for the festivals that come up, the holidays, different cultural activities, different cultural events, or whatever the unit that you're studying is, they can relate it to that unit. Okay, and so that would be something that the entire school could look at from time to time and enjoy. And again, it's somewhere that the assistant feels comfortable, and it's somewhere that they can be creative and do their own thing. There could also be a blog. Okay, it could be a virtual space. So that's another idea. Use the blog to allow them to talk about their experience in Spain, the cultural differences that they've experienced. All of those sort of things are interesting to students and interesting to other teachers as well. So allow them to carry a blog about just those things, or maybe ask them to write again about their opinions and their perspective of each of the units that you're studying. One important note that I don't want to forget to mention is that when the assistant is leading the classroom or leading activity, it's very, very important that the teacher stays there. The teacher needs to, of course, help keep the students on track, help them keep them on task, and help control the classroom. Because as I mentioned before, classroom management can be very, very difficult for a language assistant, especially one who doesn't have teaching experience. And so the teacher should absolutely always be there and helping control the class and make sure that everything works out. That was actually one of the biggest difficulties that the language assistants reported. So keep that in mind. Another way to incorporate the assistant in your classroom without having maybe the traditional two teachers in front of the classroom, or a teacher and an assistant, is just ask the assistant to support students while they're working. So while the students are working individually, they're writing or drawing or whatever, the assistant can go around and ask them about their work. They can help keep them on task, just engage them in simple conversation if they've already finished their work, just generally support them, answer questions, and so forth. This is something that the teacher may have to model at the beginning, because the assistant might not know how to engage them in conversation in this way, or how to support them while they're working. But once the teacher models this a couple times, the assistant should be able to be another set of hands and another set of eyes and ears in the classroom. And so that's a great way to employ them. The same goes for when the students are working in pairs or in groups. The assistant can go around and support those pairs and those groups. Especially if you decide to work in corners, for example, the assistant can take 2 of the 4 corners, and the teacher can take the other 2. And so they can support the students in that way. There are many different formats that you can really think about and be creative with. Next, plan a project with the assistant. And I think that personally, I think project work is a lot of fun, very motivating for everyone involved, for the teachers, for the students, for the assistant in this case. So plan a project with the assistant. And this is a great way to incorporate the interests and the studies that the assistant has, the previous experiences. So think about what they enjoy, talk to them about it, brainstorm a project, and either involve them in a project that you've already created, that you've already done before, or create a new one. And let the assistant really have a leading role in that project. Give them a specific task and let them be creative. Let them go for something a little different if they like. Okay, and this can really be a lot of fun for students as well as the assistant. So so why not try it? Next, and maybe this should have been toward the top of the list, but be sure that we make materials available to the assistant. All of this is not possible unless the assistant knows what's going to happen. And so the assistant should absolutely have a copy or at least access to the textbook and workbook for your class. That is essential. If the assistant doesn't know what's coming up, doesn't know what sort of topics that you're going to discuss, or doesn't know the level of English of the students, it's very, very difficult for him or her to plan an activity or to interact with them efficiently. So be sure that they have a copy or access to the textbook and the workbook. Also give them access to things like flashcards, stories, the big books in primary and infants, all of those extra materials that you have from the publishers. Be sure that they have access to those, because they can get creative with those different materials. And so maybe you can show them a game or two that you can play with flashcards, and that gets them thinking about other games that they could play. And so they can either make up new games or use the same games with different sets of vocabulary and be creative with that in the classroom. Also, of course, make sure that they know where and when that they can use a computer, how to request office supplies if they need them. So anything from pens and markers to card, photocopies, all of those sort of things. Make sure that they know the rules, when, how to, and the procedures. So how to ask for things, what they can ask for, when, and so forth. Okay, so just be sure that they have all of those things available to them so that they can plan. Finally, exchange feedback. Feedback is essential, in my opinion, for good communication. And so we want to have feedback for the language assistant and also for the teacher. It's important for the teacher to ask for feedback from the assistant in things like language. Of course, the assistant is the expert in this case. The expert. They'll know a lot about the language. They're the fluent speaker. They're the native speaker, and so they might not know all the rules about the language, but they'll be able to help you with pronunciation, with sayings, with common constructions, things like that you might be a little rusty on, or you're not sure, you don't remember. Ask them for feedback. And so, of course, you might not want to ask them to correct your pronunciation in front of all of your students. That's completely understandable. But you might want to ask them, hey, if I make any mistakes during today's class, can you just jot them down and we'll talk about them later? That would be an ideal opportunity for professional development, for your own development. So think about that. Also, if you'd like, ask them for feedback on the activities that you've done. Ask them, do you think that the students enjoyed this today? Do you think that this could be better? What do you think? Did you think that the students learned well? Do you think that they understood the concepts? Why not? They have a different perspective. They're seeing it from outside. And so they might be able to offer you an interesting perspective. Okay. Of course, when you give feedback to the assistant, and this is very important to do so, find time to give feedback. You want to offer both negative and positive, of course. Try to be constructive, try to tell them what they've done well in the classroom, and tell them also how they can improve. And when you tell them how they can improve, be very specific. If maybe they speak too softly, go into a classroom and ask them to go to the front of the classroom and speak, while you go to the back of the classroom and say, okay, no, a little bit louder. No, okay, that's okay, we can hear you. Be specific, be practical. Give them very specific tips on how they can improve. Do they speak too quickly? Do they, maybe they only focus on one side of the classroom. They don't always involve all of the students. Anything that you can think of. With classroom management, this is a good time also to give them some tips. The teacher's always there and keeping students on task and keeping them disciplined, but the assistant could really make great use of some very basic tips of classroom management. So very simple things like if all the students are talking, raising your hand until they all are quiet, or getting close to someone who's speaking, things like that until you teach in a classroom for some time, or you see other teachers doing this, you don't realize that that's a tool that you can use. Okay, and so be very specific and try to give them some feedback, both positive and negative. Another good way to do feedback is to use a form. If you create a form that you can use for feedback with your assistant, then you have certain categories that you can go through every time. And so that'll help you remember what you want to talk about, and you can also take notes before you meet with your assistant to give them some very specific things for each category. There's some great tools online for that, so you can look for that online as well. Okay. Overall, I think that the best way to, or the best relationships that come out of assistant and teacher is really when they work together as a partnership. They work together as partners and as equals. So if you can get to this point, this is really the best, this type of working relationship has the best results. And so think about how you work with a partner and how you can treat your assistant as a partner and as an equal. Work with them toward this co-teaching relationship where you help and guide them and mentor them until they have enough tools and enough resources to become a resourceful teacher. And then you can really go back and forth and have an excellent relationship in the working sense. And so in front of your students, the teacher can lead some activities, the assistant can do the same, and in the end, really, it'll save in planning time, because if you can get to that point, then it requires less planning. You have some nonverbal communication cues that you can use with your assistant and just say, you've got this, and things like that. So work toward that partnership, okay? Because really, the final objective here is our students. Of course, this is why we do everything that we do. We want our students to grow with their language skills and their intercultural skills. Okay, this is one of the main reasons that the language assistants are here, so that they give a reason to speak to the students. Otherwise, with a Spanish classroom full of Spanish kids and a Spanish teacher, there's really no real communicative reason to speak in English. But with a language assistant, this person from the UK doesn't speak Spanish, supposedly. And so he's the reason that everybody's speaking in English, so that he can understand. And so there's a reason to speak. If the language assistant and the teacher can give proper feedback and effective feedback to the students, they improve their language skills phenomenally. So with fluency issues, with expression, with pronunciation, and so forth. Finally, intercultural competence. The students really, they grow to understand how they can negotiate meaning with someone from a different culture, which is an ability that's really important in today's world. So try and foment this relationship between your students and the assistant. That can be very motivating, a lot of fun, and they can really gain a lot from it. Okay, the language assistants are a great resource in our classrooms, so let's try and do our best to really make the most of them. So thank you very much. If you have any questions at all, please let me know, and I'll do my best to answer them now.
Muchas gracias, Lindsay, por tu intervención. Bienvenidos a todos. Y bueno, vamos a comenzar con el turno de las preguntas. Cualquier consulta, ya sabéis que tenéis un módulo habilitado para ello, así que os animo a participar. Una pregunta, Lindsay, es what can we do with a language assistant who is very shy? Lindsay, La pregunta es, what can we do with a language assistant who is very shy? Bueno, pido disculpas, tenemos un pequeñito problema técnico. Mientras se soluciona, pues bueno, os recuerdo que durante todo el mes de julio vamos a seguir emitiendo cursos de verano a través de nuestro canal de YouTube. Podéis conectaros y bueno, son siempre gratuitos, seguro que muchos pueden ser de vuestro interés. Siempre en todos los cursos hay posibilidad de participar mediante preguntas y bueno, son debates interesantes los que se generan. No sé si Lindsay puede oírme ya.
Sí, ya te oigo, Alejandra. Gracias.
Perfecto, Lindsay, pues te transmito de nuevo la pregunta. Dice así, what can we do with a language assistant who is very shy?
Okay, with a very shy language assistant, the first thing that we can do is try and make them as comfortable as possible, of course. What we need to remember is that a lot of assistants are young, they may be inexperienced, they may be experiencing culture shock from coming to Spain from a culture that's very different. Everything's different for them and so forth. So even if they're not shy, they might be a little bit shy at the beginning of the year. So try and give your assistant some time at the beginning of the year to incorporate themselves little by little. Try and give them maybe a week or 2 weeks to just observe classes. That's all. Just go into the classes that they're going to be intervening in and just observe. See how the teacher reacts with the students, see how the teacher speaks, the pace at which they speak, the volume, see how the students speak, their level, all of those sort of things. That's valuable, extremely valuable information, the activities that they do and so forth. So let them observe first. And with someone who's a little hesitant to take charge of the classroom, let them go little by little. Let them walk around and help individuals while they work. Just give them a list of vocabulary and have them read them for pronunciation or read a paragraph out loud. Do very simple, specific things at first, and little by little have them interact more with the students, with the teacher, and in the classroom. Okay, and that'll really help a shy language assistant, giving them very specific instructions and modeling what you expect from them.
Gracias, Lindsay. Otra de las preguntas por parte de Noelia sería, regarding your own experience, how have you coped with the cultural difference between Spaniards and you? Gracias por tu pregunta, Noelia.
Yeah, thank you, Noelia. How have I coped with the cultural difference? Well, I think it's something that you learn little by little. If anyone has experience with going to a different country, it's always a learning experience, and it's a quick learning experience as well. So a little bit of trial and error, trying to be open. I think the best way is to just have an open mind about things, be very relaxed about what you expect and things like that. If it's something different from what you expect, that's okay. And so just start to learn little by little. Of course, studying the culture also helps enormously. I'm lucky enough to have studied Filología Hispánica, so of course, I had that advantage. But even so, you have a lot of cultural shock that you don't expect. So just be open, talk to people. Most people, if you ask them, to explain things and do your best to understand, people will be understanding and help you as well to understand. So that goes both for assistants and for teachers. I think that if you really make the effort to understand the other person, then he'll make the effort to understand you, and communication will little by little get a little easier. Okay, so just be open and willing to communicate and willing to ask and understand.
Bien, gracias. Vamos con otra pregunta de Eva María Fernández. Dice, should the LA assists the students with specific pronunciation tips for Spanish learners when their teachers are also reinforcing some of those common mistakes? Gracias, Eva.
Okay, Eva, thanks for your question. Should they work on specific pronunciation tips? I would say, sure. I think that the teacher will have to help the assistant to understand what those specific tips might be, or they might learn them from a book that's specific for Spanish speakers of English. But absolutely, and that I think goes hand in hand with the professional development side of it, because the teacher's of course going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes when speaking our own language, and certainly when speaking a foreign language. And they might have, very specific Spanish ways of saying, things with the R's and certain sounds that are difficult for Spanish speakers. But that's okay. That's why the language assistant is there. The assistant is there to give a native model of the language. And of course, no one's ever going to be perfect. No one's ever going to speak with a native accent unless you have this, unless you're lucky enough to be bilingual. But absolutely, that's a good way to start, actually, a pronunciation skills sort of workshop or whatever. You can focus on those difficult sounds, those sounds that are difficult for Spanish speakers, and help the teacher and help the students at the same time.
Gracias de nuevo, Lindsay. Te transmito ahora una pregunta de María Belén. Dice, what can we do if the LA doesn't want to use technology and is not very motivating for our students? Gracias, María Belén.
Okay, María Belén, thank you. What can we do if they're hesitant to use technology and aren't very motivating for our students? Well, let's go with each part of that question first. I think with technology, it might just be a question of they're not sure how to use it. So first, offer to show them how to use it, offer to explain how it works and explain the certain tools that you'd like to use, and that's a perfect way for them to learn as well. If they're still reluctant to use it, that might be a little more difficult, but unfortunately, I think we'll just have to work around it and find different ways to communicate. Maybe if they don't have a Google account and they don't want to create one, then you'll unfortunately have to find another way to communicate. But I think usually just explaining how it works and offering to show them will help them be a little more open to it. And someone who isn't very motivating for students. That's actually a complaint that a lot of teachers make, because I think it stems from a cultural difference, actually, because in general, in English-speaking countries, the relationship between a teacher and their students is very different from what we have here in Spain. And so, for example, in Spain, with very young children, we tend to, the teachers are very, sort of touchy-feely, and they give them hugs and kisses, and they, do things like that. In English-speaking countries, I come from the United States, that's very taboo. And so you really have to be careful about that. And so that's a big cultural difference that shocks a lot of the assistants as well as the teachers. So a lot of teachers say, well, I want my assistant to be close to my students. I want them to be cercanos, right? I want them to, really interact with them more. But assistants are very hesitant to do that, because in their own country, that's considered bad practice or sort of taboo. And so a conversation about that, and encouraging them to go ahead and be a little more affectionate could work. They're probably still going to be a little hesitant to be as affectionate, just because it's not natural for them. But that's one side of the motivation, I think. Also, I think that if we talk to our assistants and see what's motivating to the assistants themselves, what their interests are, what their strengths are, what their experiences are, then if the assistant is motivated, the students are going to be motivated, and they'll be motivating to the students. So maybe instead of just seeing why the assistant isn't motivating to the students, or why the students aren't motivated, I should say, start with the assistant and say, okay, why isn't he motivated? What's wrong here? And so see what you can change and how you can try and motivate the assistant to then so that they can translate that motivation to the students. So I hope I've answered your question or given you a couple ideas to start with.
Bien, gracias de nuevo. Otra pregunta de Noelia dice, what can LA do when there is a general lack of discipline and interest in the class? Gracias, Noelia.
Thanks, Noelia. Yeah, that's a really difficult situation for a language assistant. If there's a general lack of interest and discipline in the classroom, what can a language assistant do? It's difficult. I think that the assistant really needs the help of the teacher. And that can be sometimes difficult to obtain. Maybe the teacher doesn't realize, or the teacher might be less motivated himself, or for whatever reason. But the assistant can, well, first, of course, talk to the teacher. I think that's the most important. When there's ever a difficulty, the first thing we can do is communicate the difficulty and say, hey, I'm not feeling very comfortable because I feel that the students might not be as disciplined as they could be, or, something. What can we do about it? Okay. Don't, try not to blame anyone. Just say, what can we all do about it? How can we solve this problem? And that's the first step. Another step would be to look for the assistant themselves to look for tools and ways to try and manage the classroom. So do some research, talk to teachers, read books, go on the internet, look for ways to manage the classroom that will work for you. And so gain those tools for yourself to help little by little start disciplining the students, at least with the times that they're with you. So that might be another idea. Or maybe if talking to the teacher doesn't work, speak to the bilingual coordinator at your school. Hopefully she or he will be able to help you, or speak to another teacher that you trust in the school and see maybe if they can help sort of talk to the teacher and negotiate a little bit the situation. That might be another idea as well. So there's a few ideas. I hope that helps the situation.
De acuerdo. Bueno, pues vamos finalizando ya este curso de verano, así que simplemente me queda agradecer a todos los participantes su colaboración, su interés. Y bueno, tienes 2 comentarios, Lindsay, de agradecimiento por tu exposición. Les ha parecido muy práctica y bueno, agradece mucho que hayas tratado este tema. Son Soraya y Daminia las que te felicitan. Muchísimas gracias a todos por vuestra asistencia y esperamos veros pronto en otros cursos de verano. Te dejo la palabra a Lindsay para que puedas despedirte. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. And thank you all for watching. I hope it's been practical. I hope it's been interesting. Please feel free to get in contact with me if you want more further information or you have anything to comment as well. Thank you again for watching.